All right, let's talk about something we use every single day, money. But have you ever really stopped to think about where it comes from? Well, the source material we're digging into today has an answer that is, well, it's pretty startling, and it might just change how you look at every dollar in your pocket. So let's dive right in.
So let me just start by asking you this. What if money isn't what you think it is? What if the whole system, the money you work so hard for, the money you save, the money you spend, what if it all runs on a set of rules that you know nobody ever bothered to tell you about? The source we're looking at makes a bold claim that the real story of our money is right there in front of us, but it's nothing like what we've been told.
Okay, so here it is. This is the central idea, the absolute core of the argument from our source. Brace yourself for this one. It says that money is created entirely out of debt. Yeah, you heard that right. Every single dollar, every cent is basically just an IOU. And once you wrap your head around that one kind of wild idea, everything else we're about to talk about will start to click into place.
So to really get this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. We'll start with what's called the money paradox. Then we'll look at how money is created from, well, nothing. After that, we'll see how banks multiply that money, how this whole process causes inflation, that hidden tax, and we'll finish with something the source calls the unpayable interest trap.
All right, let's jump into that first big concept. According to our source, money only ever comes into the world when someone takes out a loan. It doesn't matter if it's the government, a big corporation, or just you getting a car loan. And because of that, our entire money supply has this really weird, almost paradoxical quality to it.
I mean, really think about this for a second. If, by some miracle, everyone, and I mean everyone, you, me, every company, the entire government, paid off every single debt they had tomorrow, poof, the entire money supply would just disappear. There'd be $0 left in circulation. It's a crazy thought, right? The takeaway from the source here is that our economy doesn't just have debt, it requires debt to even function.
Okay, so if money is dead, where does it all begin? Where's the starting line? Well, our source tells us to look at the special relationship between the government and its central bank. For the U.S., that's the Federal Reserve, or the Fed.
So here's how it goes down, according to the source. Let's say the government wants to spend more money than it has in taxes. What does it do? It issues these things called treasury bonds, which are basically just fancy IOUs. Then, the Federal Reserve steps in and buys those bonds. But, and this is the key question, where does the Fed get the money to buy them? It just creates it, clicks a few keys, and boom, a new deposit shows up in the government's bank account.
Let's put a number on it. If the government issues, say, $10 billion in bonds, the Fed just conjures up $10 billion to buy them. That money did not exist 1 second before that transaction. It was literally typed into existence, all based on the government's promise to eventually pay it back. Now, when we say create money, don't picture giant printing presses churning out $100 bills. Our source makes a really important point here. A mind-blowing 97% of all the money out there isn't physical at all. It's just numbers on a computer screen, digital entries on a server. That little 3%, that's the actual cash and coins you can hold in your hand.
But wait, it gets even wilder. That initial creation of money by the central bank, that's just step 1. The whole process really kicks into high gear. It just explodes once that new money hits the regular commercial banking system. And this is all thanks to something called fractional reserve banking.
So what is that? It's actually a pretty simple idea. When you deposit your money in a bank, the bank doesn't have to just let it sit there. The rules, as our source points out, say they only have to keep a small piece of it, a fraction, let's say 10% on hand in their reserves. And that means they can lend out the other 90%.
Okay, now this is where the source says the real magic trick happens. So that $10 billion from the government gets deposited in a commercial bank. The bank keeps $1 billion, that's the 10% reserve. Now you'd think they'd lend out the other $9 billion that's already there, right? Wrong. This is the crucial part. The source says the bank actually creates a totally new $9 billion to issue as loans. That money is created out of thin air, just like the Fed did. And of course, once that new loan money gets deposited in another bank, well, you can see how the cycle just keeps on going.
The final result of this whole cycle is just staggering. According to the source, for every single dollar the central bank creates initially, the banking system as a whole can multiply it, creating about 9 times that amount in new money. It all just gets magicked into existence, simply because people are asking for loans. Okay, so let's pause and think about this. We've got a system that is literally designed to pump more and more and more money into the economy, all of it based on debt. So what happens when you have this constantly growing pile of money? Well, according to the source, you get something we're all painfully familiar with: inflation. It's pretty simple supply and demand, really. If you have way more dollars floating around, all chasing the same amount of stuff, cars, food, houses, what happens? The prices for that stuff go up. It means your dollar just doesn't stretch as far as it used to. The source describes this as a hidden tax because it eats away at your savings and your purchasing power day after day without anyone ever having to vote on it.
And that brings us to the last piece of the puzzle. According to our source, this is the most critical and maybe the most damaging part of the whole system, and it all has to do with interest.
Think about it like this. When the bank gives you a loan, let's say a $100,000 mortgage, it creates that $100,000, the principal. But the loan agreement says you have to pay back the principal plus interest. Let's call it $105,000. So, where's that extra $5,000 supposed to come from? Here's the catch. According to the source, it was never created. That money for the interest just doesn't exist.
So what happens? The source uses this really powerful analogy. It's like a game of musical chairs. You've got all these people scrambling to pay back both their loan and the interest, but the money to pay all the interest was never put into the game. It means someone, somewhere, has to lose. It's a mathematical certainty. And in the real world, losing the game means default, bankruptcy, and foreclosure, which ends up transferring real wealth, your house, your car, your business, over to the banks.
And this leads to the source's final, pretty stark conclusion. It actually describes this system as a form of modern slavery. Think about it. This constant, grinding pressure of debt, coupled with the fact that there's not enough money to go around to pay it all back, forces almost everyone onto this hamster wheel. We're not just working to live, we're working to service a mountain of debt that, for the system as a whole, is mathematically impossible to pay off.
So there you have it. That's the argument laid out in the source material we've been exploring. It's a really radical way of looking at money, not as just a simple tool we use to buy things, but as a complex machine that's built on a foundation of perpetual, inescapable debt. And that leaves us with a really big and honestly pretty unsettling question to think about. If this is how our system truly works, what does that mean for our future?